Afternoon in Cape Town. I don't know where.
It's an earlier afternoon in Joburg.
An earlier afternoon. Okay, nice to see everyone. And just once this page is set up here, we'll get started. It is 1 o'clock. So shkach, great to have everyone as always. Hi Ken.
Hi Rowan. Hi everyone.
Hello, Ken.
Hello.
Hello, Ken.
How are you, Ken?
Okay, I'm going to share the screen and we'll get started. Maybe a word of kind of introduction to this chapter, because it's good that we kind of remember that in the so-called process of marriage, there's really two steps. There's what we call kiddushin or erusin, which are synonymous, which is what we would translate as betrothal. And actually a lot of what we've spoken about is really that stage of marriage. And then you got nisuin, which is the actual marriage, when a husband and wife are now going to live together. And that comes with a whole new level of responsibility. Why sometimes we don't distinguish these two things, but it's critical that we do when we learn these chapters, is because nowadays both those stages really take place under the chuppah, or in order to really satisfy all opinions, between the chuppah and the moments that the couple will go into seclusion after the chuppah. So you satisfy all opinions that they've done kiddushin, which is the betrothal, and they're now also formally married. But back in the day, these were two very distinct processes, and could be, as we'll see, the time between them could be a very extended period. So we begin today with the first halacha. Ha'arusa asura labala midibri sofrim kol zman shehu beis havia. A woman who's been betrothed to a man is forbidden to engage in sexual relations with her husband so long as she's living in her father's home. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean physically she's living in the home of her father. It simply means that they have not yet moved in together to bring the marriage to its completion. So, and a lot of what we've spoken about, the whole process of kiddushin that we've spoken about, and sometimes we translate it as marriage, is really only that first step of what we'd call betrothal. And a man who has relationships with his arusa, his betrothed, in his father-in-law's home, again, doesn't have to be physically in the home, but it means before they've actually moved in together, is punished with what we call rabbinic lashes for rebellion. Even when the husband consecrates his arusa by having sexual relations with her, we said kiddushin can happen in one of three ways: money, a document, or actual relations. Even if the method of kiddushin, which we completely discouraged, you'll remember, but biblically it's allowed, still he's forbidden to engage in further sexual relations until he actually brings her into his home, where you have the nisuin, the marriage, and they enter into privacy, and thus he singles her out as his wife. Now, their entry into privacy is referred to as the entry into the chuppah, and is universally referred to as nisuin. According to the Rambam, we refer to chuppah as that wedding canopy that the couple goes onto. According to the Rambam, he refers to chuppah as what we would refer to perhaps as that yichud room, when they actually go into a room that's secluded, that the husband takes ownership of, and the betrothed now comes into that, and they now seclude themselves for the purpose of marriage. But that's the critical next step after the erusin. And once they've done that, now the marriage is fully in effect. When a man has relations with his arusa for the sake of establishing the nisuin after he's consecrated her, so now they've gone into private, this he just distinguishes here between at what point kiddushin takes place and at what point nisuin takes place, when we talk about the sexual act being the method. So you will remember that for kiddushin to take place, it's just the beginning of them coming to, in order for kiddushin to take place, it's actually the completion of the sexual act. And in order for nisuin to take place, it would actually just be the beginning of it. Okay, that's a technical point in the halacha. Second halacha, he says, once the arusa says enter under the chuppah, again, in the Rambam's mind, the chuppah is a secluded room where they go into, not just the canopy that we have. Although in many ways we consider that canopy as that room nowadays as well. But the Rambam understands it actually as the room where they go into seclusion with the intention of moving in together, so to speak. So then her husband is allowed to have relations with her at any time he desires. Of course, that is provided that she is in a state of what we call purity and not in a state of nida. Once she enters into the chuppah, in other words, once the marriage is fully in effect, she's called an nesu'ah as opposed to an arusa. She's no longer betrothed, she's now married. Even though they have not actually engaged in sexual relations. As soon as they go into seclusion with that intention, they're already married. And the responsibilities of marriage come with that from that point on. We'll see some of them in this chapter, and we'll learn further about others later. The above applies when it is fitting to engage in relations with the woman. If the woman is in a nida state, now this is a unique halacha of the Rambam. Not everybody agrees with this. The Rambam basically says that if the woman is in a state of nida, where it would not be possible for them to have intimate sexual relations, because of the laws of nida, then the marriage is not considered to be completely completed, and she would have to still come back to, they would have to wait for a time when she is no longer nida in order for the nisuim to take effect, even though they've entered into the privacy together. La halacha, I know, practically speaking, we don't follow this, but that's the Rambam's opinion. The halacha 3. The marriage blessings must be recited in the groom's home before the marriage takes place. There are 6 blessings. I'll read them in Hebrew, and then because the blessing we're somewhat familiar with, and just give a broad kind of appreciation for it. We basically give thanks to Hashem for creation, for creating man and woman, for allowing man and woman to come together to build a family, and ultimately to build our city and to rejoice together. And we also reference a time when we've completed kind of our mission with the coming of Mashiach, and we refer to the added joy that comes with that, or how the building a family brings towards that goal. So those are the intentions in the blessing. You'll notice that it says here 6 blessings. You might remember that when we make 7 blessings, so we'll see where the 7th blessing is in the next halakha. But these are the blessings. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam she'akol b'ra lechoda. Thanking Hashem for creation. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam yotzer adam. Thanking, acknowledging the creation of man. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher yatzar et ha'adam b'tzalmo b'tzelem dmut tavnito v'yitkin lo mimena b'nyan ad yad. Baruch atah Hashem yotzer adam. This is a reference to the creation of woman, really. Sos tasis v'tagel ha'arka, because v'nao v'tocha v'simcha baruch atah Hashem v'sameach tzimba. But now this is a reference to the joy in Jerusalem when Jewish families are being built. Sameach tsamach re'ma'uvin k'sameach yitzich b'ganen mikedem. Baruch atah Hashem sameach chasan imakala, refer to the joy experienced in Eden for Adam and Eve, and that this joy should be replicated for this couple. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher bara sason v'simcha chatan v'kala gila rina ditza v'chedva ava v'achva v'shalom v'reot meher Hashem Elokeinu yesham v'ar Yehuda v'chutzet Yerushalayim kol sason v'kol simcha kol chatan v'kol kala. You can all join me in the song kol mitzalot chasanim mechubatan v'narim v'nishtei niginatan. Right, we're familiar with these joins. We bring in blessing, joy to the couple, to the marriage, and look forward to the time of when Jerusalem will be filled with song and joy. Baruch atah Hashem. It's just one point to note is that in the previous blessing we ended Mesameach Chatan v'Kala. As we enter into the Nisuim, we start off as 2 individuals. We want them each to rejoice in the moment, and then the marriage actually marks the moment when they come together as a couple, and it's Chatan Imakala. The rejoicing is together and within each with one another. The 4th halakha. So this is where right? We mentioned 6. Most of us are familiar with 7 blessings. Where's the 7th blessing? If you have a cup of wine, you make a blessing on the cup of wine first, and then all the other blessings should be said while you have that cup of wine. This is the 7th blessing. In certain places, I haven't seen this, but it might have been in practice in the Rambam's time. Maybe in some places it's still practiced that you would also bring a myrtle branch. I guess it's an idea of bringing some type of other pleasure to the moment, and you'll make the blessing over the fragrance of the myrtle branch as you then go on to make the 6 blessings for the Nisuim, for the marriage. So interesting, right? The marriage itself has to be witnessed by 2 witnesses, but the blessings have to be recited in the presence of a minyan. So if somebody asks you, do you need to have a minyan at a chuppah? So technically speaking, for the part of the kiddushin, you only need really the 2 witnesses, right? But for the blessings, because we do have the Birkat Nisuim, then you do need a valid minyan, and he mentions that you would only actually need 9 additional men because the chassan himself would be one of those 10. Usually that's not such a big problem. A marriage is a big simcha, you have a lot of people, but I suppose now it might be practical with all the restrictions and lockdown. You might have, weddings have to be done in very particular ways. You might have a situation where you only have 10 men, including the Khatan, to make the minyan. Anyway, halacha 6. What happens if you were betrothed to a woman or consecrated a woman, and then you make these blessings, but you have not yet brought her into your home, so she still remains arusa, because the blessings themselves do not affect the marriage, the nisuim. Rather, her coming into his home, him bringing her into his home, is what is considered the chuppah, or finalizing the marriage. What happens if he is engaged to a woman, consecrates a woman, betrothed her, and then they go into privacy together, but have not made the blessings? Then she is considered nisua, she is married, because the blessing doesn't make it, but the action of him inviting her into his home is what completes the marriage. Now, because usually if you do a mitzvah, right, and you put on your tefillin, you forgot to say a blessing. Now you've taken them off. There's no point in saying a blessing anymore. But the blessings on the marriage is not just a blessing for the act of marriage, but it's a blessing on actually being married. And therefore you can, if you didn't make the blessings in advance, like before going into the chuppah or into the private room together, then you could still say those blessings afterwards. In fact, as we'll know, is that throughout what we'll learn soon are the days of celebration after the wedding, we continue to say those blessings each day. Okay. A woman in an interstate should not marry until she is purified. The marriage blessings are not recited for her until she is purified. If a person transgresses, meaning she marries in the state of nida, then the blessing is recited. They should not be recited again afterwards. Practically speaking, what we try to do nowadays is to time a woman is either familiar with her cycle or she can manipulate her cycle to make sure that she's not married in a state of nida. But unlike the Rambam, even if a woman was married in a state of nida, we would still say the blessing. They would still be considered completely married if that happened to be the circumstance, unplanned for circumstance. The seventh halacha. Okay, now this is a new era. Before you come under the chuppah, before you complete the marriage, the husband must write a ketubah. This is like a marriage document. What is in it? And only with this ketubah is she permitted to her husband. And it's his obligation to write the ketubah, so he has to pay the scribe to write the ketubah. Just in a nutshell, what is the purpose of this ketubah? It's, as we'll see soon, but it's really, this is you'll often hear the rabbi saying, this is one of the most ancient documents in Jewish law that protects the woman's rights. And the idea was that a man shouldn't easily be able to kick his wife out with divorce. Why? Because the ketubah essentially promises her a certain amount of money in the event of his passing or divorce. In the event, God forbid, of his passing or divorce. So it'll make a guy really think twice about how, if he's going to, just simply throw out, so to speak, a wife. So it was there to protect the woman. Now, he gives us the basics of what was required in the ketubah. He says, how much does the marriage contract require him to promise to have paid her in the event of his death or divorcing her? So if the bride is a virgin, so there's a difference if she's coming in under the chuppah as a virgin, so then nothing less than 200 dinarim. He'll give us a little bit more of an indication of exactly what this money was. Although often, I must be honest, I don't know what it translates into current terms. I have to double check that. But 200 dinarim, if she's not a virgin, then no less than 100 dinarim. So a minimum is he has to pay her 200 for a virgin, 100 for a non-virgin when they get married. This amount is called the fundamental requirements of the ketubah. Okay, that's the ikra ketubah. Now, if the groom desires, and this is what's customary, that the groom would add on an additional amount, then he can add on whatever amount he wants, even a talent of gold. Now, the laws pertaining to this addition and to the fundamental requirement of the ketubah are the same with regard to most matters. That means she'll get the payout caused by the same events, whether it's the ikra ketubah or whether it's the asafah, whether it's what he's added to it. She'll always get it. There may be certain exceptions, but as a rule, she'll get the ikra ketubah, the basic amount, plus the addition that he's committed to. Therefore, every time the term ketubah is used without any additional explanation, should be understood to include the fundamental requirement of the ketubah together with an additional amount. In other words, when we say that he owes the ketubah, it means every amount that's in there, not just the ikra ketubah or the asafah, but the combined amounts. It was our sages who ordained the requirement of writing ketubah for a woman. Again, this is the opinion of the Rambam. There are others who believe actually that this might have been a biblical requirement, but okay, it's certainly an absolute halakha. They institute this obligation so that it would not be casual matter for a husband to divorce her. As I intimated earlier, it was for the protection of a woman in marriage. Halacha 8. Dinarim elus, he just helps us understand what are these 200 dinar or zuz that he was referring to. So he says, you should know that these dinarim are not pure silver. Instead, we're talking about a coin that was commonly used at that time, which was 7 parts copper, 1 part silver. So he says, therefore, a seller, a coin which is worth 4 dinarim, contains half a zuz of pure silver. And the 200 dinarim to be paid a virgin were equivalent to 25 zuz of pure silver. In other words, the base amount actually that we're concerned about is really the silver, right? So, but because we're talking about, when he says 200 dinarim, only has 1/7 of silver in it. So if you had 25 pure silver dinarim, it would be the same thing. Zuz and dinar are synonymous. So he said, while 100 zuz to be paid to a woman had previously engaged in sexual relations, right, someone who was not a non-virgin, she would be due 12.5 zuz of pure silver. The weight of each zuz is 96 barley corns, as explained at the beginning of the Hilchot Eruvin. A dinar is universally referred to as a zuz, regardless of whether it was a pure silver or of the coins used in the Talmudic period. I guess that's why he has to clarify that some dinarim, because we use the term generically, we have to know what the base amount is, again, really in silver. So it's either, if it were pure silver, it would be 25 coins. If it was the common coin, it would be 200. Okay. Ein pachasin. Now, again, so he clarifies, a marriage contract for a virgin may not be less than 200 zuz, nor less than 100 zuz for a woman who is not a virgin. Whether anyone composes a marriage contract for a less, whenever you compose a marriage document for less, then intimacy, sexual relations are considered promiscuous. In other words, there's to be a protection to the marriage, and there's to be a basic financial commitment level. Anything lower than that, your relationship is considered promiscuous. Marital relations are permitted whether the husband composes a legal document, like the ketubah, or, so in other words, it can be a written document, or it can be a commitment that he makes in the presence of witnesses, okay? And reaffirms a commitment with a contractual act. It's what we call a kinyan chalifin. You know, has anybody ever asked you, if you'll see at the wedding, you'll ask the chatan to lift up because we try to actually combine both, something of value. In that moment, he's accepting responsibility. So what we're saying over here is that as long as there is an accountability to that commitment of the monetary commitment to the wife, whether it's written in the document, the ketubah, or he does it through this other format of acquisition, taking responsibility in the presence of witnesses, that would also be okay. Similarly, a man gives his wife possession equivalent to the value of her ketubah, so he gives her security, he gives her collateral that she holds on to, unless, in case that he passed away before or there's a disillusionment of the marriage, that's also fine. That is equal to a ketubah. As long as she's got her protection, that's the point. That it shouldn't be easy for him just to say goodbye without him costing him. Okay. Halacha 10. When a man brings a woman into a chuppah without writing a ketubah for her, or he has written her ketubah but it was lost, or the woman waived the ketubah in favor of her husband, or she sold the ketubah to the husband, he must compose a document obligating himself for at least the fundamental requirements of the ketubah. See, here's the story. The ketubah basically to the wife is a guarantee that she's not going to just be thrown out, right? Now, the ketubah could have had a large amount in it if the husband added beyond the 200 zuz, right? So she might say that she wants to, sell it off. As we'll see, she maybe sells it off to somebody else. But she might sell it back to her husband. There's a risk in the ketubah. She'll only get the full amount. Let's say it's R1 million in that ketubah. She'll only get it if he dies before he divorces her. If she dies before, she gets nothing. So she might say she wants 500,000 rand now, and she won't take the risk. So she sells it to him, back to the husband, or gives it back to the husband. He has to at least give her, rewrite a basic ketubah of the basic amount. Okay? But this is interesting. If she sells it to somebody else, right? Let's say she's got a ketubah worth $1 million. She sells the risk, right, to the guy that maybe her husband's going to die before her. Guy says, okay, I'll buy it from you for 500,000 rand. Theoretically. She wants the tova sana, as we call it. She wants to benefit now from it. So then the husband doesn't have to rewrite the ketubah for her. Why? Because he's still going to be held accountable for that money. His estate's still going to have to pay 500,000 rand if he dies first, or if he thinks about divorcing her, he's going to have to pay that money. So even though it's not going directly to her, but the basic protection that he's not going to just throw out without thinking twice remains there. And that was the intention of the ketubah. Okay. Halacha 11. Now, okay, so we said there's the two stages, right? There's erisin, there's a consecration or betrothal, and then there's the marriage. Now, what we learned today is that before marriage, you must have a ksuva. But what happens if they got engaged and he writes a ksuva, but they're not yet married? They haven't yet moved in together. So what happens now? So he says, if you've written ksuva, but you have not yet gone into the chuppah, as you haven't completed the marriage. So her status still remains that of an arusa and not that of an nesua. For a ksuba does not bring about nisuin. Now, what happens if the husband dies or divorces her? She may collect the fundamental requirements of the ksuba from the property possessed by the man or his estate, but she does not collect any additional sum that he attached to the ksuba at all, for they do not enter into the chuppah yet. In other words, if he writes it and they're not yet married, again, nowadays everything happens on the same day, within a few hours, and under the chuppah. So we don't have this distinction. But back in the day, if somebody got consecrated, engaged, and he wrote a ksuba, but they're only getting married months later. And in the ksuba, he writes the basics, 200 zuz plus whatever he's going to add. Then he passes away, tragically. Or they get divorced, right? From erisin, you still need a get. So up until that point, he only has to pay the basics, even though he had intimated that he was going to add on. That only becomes into effect once they actually nasui, once they're fully married. When a man consecrates his daughter, again, we learned about the possibility that a father can marry off his daughter, who's a katana, right? It's something that the Rambam strongly condemns doing, but biblically it would take effect. If that happens, and a ksuba was written before nisuin, then the father would collect. This is just in line with what we learned last week, that the father collects for his daughter that's a child that he arranged the marriage for. Now, in addition to giving a woman a ksuva, which gives her protection, security in the marriage, there's another enactment of our sages, that for 7 days after the wedding, the man spends his time bringing joy to his wife. Now, there is an overlap between the so-called Sheva Brachot and the 7 days, but they're not exactly synonymous. Okay, just keep that in mind. We often refer to the week as the week of Sheva Brachot, because during that week, every time you gather, you will say the Sheva Brachot, but it is actually two distinct kind of obligations. So when it comes to marrying a virgin, 7 days. What does it mean? What does it mean that he should rejoice with her? It means that he should not go to work, shouldn't involve himself in commercial dealings, and he should spend his time eating, drinking, and celebrating with his wife. And the point of Yosef is this is regardless of whether the groom has been married before or not. It depends on the woman. Is this her first marriage? She gets a week. If the bride is not a virgin, meaning it's not a first marriage, then he's got to celebrate for no less than 3 days. Now he says this is an ordinance of our sages that a husband, regardless of whether he's married before or not, should celebrate with a non-virgin bride for 3 days. Again, he's emphasizing that it's dependent on the wife, not on the husband. Halacha 13. This is a funny situation, but this also helps us to distinguish between the Sheva Brachot and the days of celebration. He says if a man marries a number of women on one day, okay, now he can say the blessings that we spoke about, kulam ka'achas. He can make one set of blessings for all the marriages. But in order to celebrate, rejoice with each bride, each one needs to be allotted her own time, 7 days, and they can't overlap, or 3 days if it's a non-virgin. So, if a guy marries five women on one day, so 7 days, what's 5 times 7? Basically, he's going to take a half a year off work and he's going to have to spend 7 days with each of them separately, or at a minimum of 3 days. And that is the obligation, which is a fascinating idea, that the first week of marriage needs to be dedicated chos and kala alone. Now we're going back to consecrating, to the kiddushin. One can get betrothed any weekday of the year, even on Tisha B'Av. In other words, even if it's a sad day. And the reason is because we don't want somebody else to swoop in and maybe chap your bride or your intended. So you can do it. He says, and you can do this at night or day, but as far as nisuin, you can't do that. There's restrictions. So not on a Friday or on a Sunday, and this was a decree in order to ensure that it wasn't going to be a desecration of Shabbos, because for the groom, he says, would be preoccupied with the wedding feast. There's possibilities of desecrating Shabbos, so you don't do it on a Friday or a Sunday, and of course not on Shabbos itself, where there's concern that you might desecrate the Shabbos. Now he says, even on Chol HaMoed, weddings are not held. Why does he say this here? Because on Chol HaMoed, right, it's the intermediate days in a Yom Tov. On those days, there shouldn't be a concern of desecrating, because you can prepare a meal. There's no problem with that, right? He says, nonetheless, we don't have weddings on Chol HaMoed, and the reason is because we have this rule that ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha. We don't mix two simchas together, right? And we learn this from where? We learn this actually from the story of Lavan, where he tells Yaakov that first he married Leah, and then he says, complete the week of celebration for this one, and then I'll give you this one. In order to marry Rachel, he must wait a full week, so Leah has her full week, even though it was not the woman he had thought he was marrying, but then he can go on and celebrate with Rachel. On other days, it's permitted to wed a woman on any day. On other days, it's permitted to wed a woman on any day one desires, provided one spends 3 days preparing for the wedding feast. In other words, other than Friday, Shabbat, Sunday, any other day of the week. Now, he does now mention some preferred days. In a place, he says, where the courts only get together on a Monday or a Thursday, so a virgin bride should get married on a Wednesday. This is in case her husband has claims that she was not actually a virgin. We'll learn more laws about this, but if we've learned that there are different requirements when somebody marries a virgin or a non-virgin. If he goes into the marriage presuming that she's a virgin and finds out that she's not, he's got a claim. He might be very angry. He'll need to take this claim to the court. So the suggestion is she should get married on a Wednesday. So on Thursday, he can go straight to court if situation arises that he needs to make a claim. It's a custom of the sages that a man who weds a non-virgin bride should wed her on a Thursday, so that he will celebrate with her on Thursday, Friday, and Shabbat, and on Sunday he'll go back to work. Basically, there is a scenario where if it's both of them, not their first marriage, technically they only have 1 day of Sheva Brachot. So because we want to ensure that no couple has less than 3 days together immediately after the wedding, so you'll have Thursday, the day of the wedding, Friday, and then Shabbat, he's not going to work. That protects that scenario where both of them had previously been married, to make sure that they'll actually have time together at the start of the marriage. Halacha 16. Now, if a man consecrates his daughter, see, this is interesting, right? Because when we learned this halacha previously, we kind of thought marriage, we just think one thing. But actually what we spoke about earlier was the state of kiddushin. Now, what could happen is, so long as she's still a youngster, either she or her father can ask that the actual nisuin, I know, is the time that she actually moves in with this guy, be delayed. At least till she becomes a nara, and at least until she's 12 years old, even though she may not yet have shown signs of maturity, which would then lead to the next stage of bagrus, of full adulthood, as we learned in the early chapters. Now, they can request it, he can refuse it, but it's not the proper thing to do. In other words, what the Rambam is basically saying like this, he says, don't marry if you're, as we learned previously, don't marry if a child, daughter. But if whatever circumstances force you to do it, then at the very least, you're given the right to say to the guy, okay, hold off on the wedding though. You guys are consecrated, but hold off on the wedding. She don't have to move in until she's already at least 12, whatever it is, right? Now, what does a man consecrate a girl and now delayed several years? Now he seeks to wed her while she is a nara. So nara is from 12 to 12 and a half before she's shown signs of maturity, right? Or even if she starts to show, but you don't yet have 6 months, right? The girl is given 12 months from the day he makes his request to outfit herself and prepare what she needs for him. Only afterwards must she wed. So in other words, theoretically, right, they were consecrated when she was 9 years old. And they agreed to wait till she's older. Now she's 12, but not yet 12 and a half. And he says, okay, let's get married now. In other words, let's complete the nisuin. She is given 12 months. She's allowed 12 months to prepare herself for this wedding. Okay? If he makes this request after she became a Bogeret, so she's 12 and a half and has signs of bodily signs of maturation, then she is given 12 months from the day that she becomes a Bogeret. So in most cases, it would be from 12 years old and 6 months, so long as she shows normal signs of body maturity, right? So then, in other words, so if he comes to that day, she would be given 12 months. If he comes to a month later, it would be 11 months from the time that he mentions it, because you count the 12 months from when she became a Bogeret. When he consecrates her after, she has, one is if the Kiddushin only takes place after she's already a Bogeret. So if more than 12 months have passed from the time she became a Bogeret until he consecrates her, she is given only 30 days from the day he requests to wed her, to prepare. Similarly, when a man consecrates a non-virgin bride, she's given 30 days to prepare from the day he requests to wed her. In other words, an adult girl, fully adult girl, the Rambam is assuming is already preparing for marriage, even if she's not preparing for marriage to a particular individual. So she doesn't need a whole year, but she's given at the very least a month. Of course, if they agree on another amount of time, they'll agree on another amount of time, which is usually what happens. But the law dictates a minimum amount of time, right? Halacha 18. He says, just as a woman is given time to outfit herself from when the groom requests the marriage till the wedding, so to the man would be granted. In other words, she's pushing. She says, okay, we've been engaged, let's get married. He's also given time. How much time is he given? The same that is granted to her. In other words, if she was betrothed as a child, she turns 12, she's a Naira, and she says, okay, I'm ready to get married. He's given a full year if he wants. If she's a Bogeret, he's given a year from when she became Bogeret, and so on. Otherwise, it would be 30 days. Halacha 19, when the time allotted to the man passes and he still has not wed his Arusa. So now he's given a year, let's say for the Naira, but he doesn't go ahead with the wedding. He doesn't bring her into his home. From that moment, when he should have married her fully, he's obligated to provide her livelihood, although they are not yet wed. Nevertheless, if the final day and the time allotted for him falls on a Sunday or a Friday, he is not liable for a livelihood on that day, for the wedding cannot be held on then. Right? You're following? In other words, if he's given 6 months and the end date of the 6th month is a Sunday, when you're not allowed to get married on a Sunday, so he doesn't have to, he's not responsible for food for that Sunday, but from Monday it would be liable. Similarly, if she falls ill or she enters into a niddah state at the conclusion of that time allotted, then he's not obligated to provide for her with her livelihood until she gets better. For she's not fit to wed until she purifies herself, until she becomes healthy. Similarly, he is not able to wed a woman until she regains his health, and that would be the same story. He would not be expected to have to provide for her because if extraneous circumstances forced them not to be able to marry at that time. Okay, that's the end of this chapter. As always,